Mayor Michael Bloomberg with a press conference telling folks what to do as Sandy nears. Let's listen in.
Emergency management website or the website of the mayor's office for people with disabilities, which will also provide information about accessible transportation. But I want to reiterate that this evacuation is mandatory. It is for your own safety. If you cannot evacuate yourself and need assistance, call 311 and we will be sure to make sure somebody comes and helps you. Now, we will not be, in general, evacuating patients in the hospitals and chronic care facilities in Zone A, although we have evacuated, or in the process of evacuating, a small hospital in downtown Manhattan. The reason for all of this is that these shelters have facilities, they have backup generators, and it's dangerous to move people when they're elderly. So on balance, we think they'll be fine. Every one of the shelters has been contacted more than once, and we're satisfied that it's an intelligent decision to leave them in place. The teams from the city's health department are at these facilities making sure that the emergency generators are working and that they have backup fuel supplies. And yesterday, these facilities were also ordered to increase staffing immediately, and they have. Patients are also being moved to higher floors where they should be safer in the case of flooding, and all of them have discharged patients that don't really require their services to reduce the number of people they have to take care of. Earlier this morning, Governor Cuomo and the MTA announced that they have begun to put in effect their contingency plan that they described Saturday. As I said before, they'll be closing down the city transit and suburban commuter rail systems tonight. Last subway runs will be at 7. Last bus runs will be at 9. In the meantime, they are adding extra staff during today to be able to provide more transportation for people who want to leave Zone A. They do have to make sure that their equipment doesn't get damaged. Otherwise, we would not have subway trains when this is over, or buses when it's over. So I think they are taking the kind of appropriate action that they should. That does put some pressure on everybody to use their facilities, however, while they're still functioning. Let me repeat what I said earlier. This is a serious and dangerous storm. For those in Zone A, evacuation is mandatory, in or out of Zone A during the storm. However, the safest place to be is indoors. If you live in a high-rise and lose power, you may lose water as well. So as I suggested yesterday, fill a few pots of water and leave them on the sideboard so you can drink, use them for the wash. During the height of the storm, use staircases. Avoid using elevators. You never know when power would go out. You don't want to be stuck in an elevator, and if you are, obviously our fire department will come and rescue you, but they've got enough to do, so if we can avoid calling on them for those kinds of things, they'll be there for real emergencies. Stay away from windows and close your drapes. As we said yesterday, flying objects can go right through a window. Now, gale force winds are something that almost all buildings in the city are built to handle, but there are old buildings where sometimes pieces of the building fly off. We think the construction sites are all tied down, and that's not as much of a worry as some of the older buildings. But if you don't go outside and you don't go near your windows, you don't run the risk of getting hit by flying objects. As I said, the public schools will be closed on Monday. We'll make a decision Monday afternoon, evening about Tuesday. Our hope is that we can be open on Tuesday, but we will close the schools on Monday. Teachers who work in schools where we have open shelters have volunteered to report to their shelters for serving the public, and that's great. We will need them. Street cleaning rules and parking meter rules are suspended citywide on Monday, but city offices are open, and city employees should make every effort to report to their jobs on Monday morning. Now, we will, if we have any more updates, put them out later in the day. We will try to notify everybody in Zone A.
And you were just listening there to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He was talking about schools being closed Monday, how you can stay safe. Also, right before we came to him when we were in the commercial break, he was also talking about if you go to a shelter, take your pets. So obviously, a lot of these areas have learned from Katrina, make sure you don't leave them behind.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a huge issue now. Over the next 24 to 36 hours, we think Sandy will be getting closer, of course, to the New York City area. So we have our live crews in the field as well. In fact, fact, Storm Tracker Jim Cantori is out at Battery Park. That's on the western tip of Manhattan. And Jim, we were listening to Mayor Bloomberg, and he was giving the details on the contingency plans to the different zones in the area. Do you know which zone you're in there at Battery Park? I would assume that that's Zone A, is it not?
It is. It is. This is an evacuation zone. And guys, we got to emphasize the point that in what has happened here this morning. First of all, the governor comes on about an hour ago and says, look, we're shutting down mass transit at 7 o'clock. The mayor has now come on and made a key decision to evacuate Zone A. That's an evacuation area of about 375,000 people. This is what they did for Hurricane Irene. This was a decision that caused a lot of frustration last night, especially to us as meteorologists, because we knew the potential was there to certainly have a higher surge than what we had with Irene, and we saw the kind of flooding that occurred there. So this was, in my opinion, a great decision. I hope everybody heeds that evacuation. That's the thing now. We want to get everybody in Zone A out of harm's way, able to use mass transit if that's what they choose. Obviously, stay with friends and family. That's the first choice. There are 72 shelters open to choose from if you're not going to stay with friends and family, but just make sure, obviously, they're out of that zone. Public schools also closed on Monday. That's pretty much a given in through here. And this may mean some of the folks staying down here in Zone A may have to actually even leave their hotels and move to another area. So key announcement coming from the mayor of New York this morning. We are going to evacuate Zone A, 375,000 people.
Impacts are going to be very significant. I wouldn't focus on as a Category 1 hurricane. I'd focus on what the impacts are being forecast for your area and heat evacuation orders, as those are going to be issued today based upon the storm surge threat and then potentially for river flooding and flash flooding in the out days.
That was FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate, of course, urging people to take this storm very seriously and to start preparing. Now, the storm is headed for the Northeast, so all conditions will be going downhill in New York City, Boston, Hartford, and Philadelphia. In fact, the NFL is keeping a close eye on Sandy as it lashes parts of the East Coast. And we want to talk now with the voice of the Atlanta Falcons, who are in town, of course, in Philadelphia for the game later this afternoon. And it is Wes Durham. Wes, can you hear me?
I can, Vivian. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you? And how are the Falcons doing? Of course, they're in Philadelphia right now getting prepared. How are they preparing for the game?
Well, a lot of people here obviously have been following the weather closely overnight since Atlanta arrived here yesterday afternoon. And I think fortunately for game conditions, it's going to be a lot of wind. They don't expect the rain portion of Sandy to get here until earlier this evening. So hopefully the game will be played in just a lot of wind, although I know that people here at Lincoln Financial Field have been prepared for the rain and so forth. But I don't anticipate that we're going to have a lot of precipitation until after the ball game concludes. But once the game concludes, Atlanta will be in a hurry-up mode of their own, so to speak, to use the football analogy, to go ahead and get on out of town. That'll be the most important operation after the ball game, is to go ahead and get the Falcon charter loaded and try and get it back to Atlanta. Obviously, probably going west to come south, but I think that'll be the most important operation Atlanta has following the game. They hope this game, though, is going to be played in just windy conditions and not a lot of rain. If it becomes rain and wind, they'll continue to play. It won't be very pretty. The only way they would stop a ball game would be if they had lightning in the area.
Oh, yeah. Well, have you been hearing anything like from the locals about the storm? Are they concerned, do you know?
I think they are concerned. I think they, you know, and I heard the analogy that Jim used with New York a moment ago in your piece about our Hurricane Irene, and I think that has a lot of people on alert or high alert here in the Northeast. A lot of folks this morning in Philadelphia, particularly on the local side, you know, heeding caution to people. The evacuations here have not been announced as they have in New York that I heard Jim mention a moment ago. But I think people here in Philadelphia are on alert, particularly out on the Jersey coast at Cape May and Rehoboth Beach, as to how things are going to develop here in the next 6 hours for sure.
Okay, well, we'll certainly be watching the overall conditions for the game later today. Again, that's the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons playing later this afternoon in Philadelphia. Of course, we're watching overall weather conditions from Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, off the coast now, moving northward into the area. So the winds will be on the increase for sure, and of course the wet weather will be a factor as well. So we'll definitely keep you updated on that. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about the snowy side of Sandy, if you can believe that. That's going to be a huge component to this storm as well. Right, Heather?
Well, and that, too, is what makes this one of the things that makes this so intriguing, because we are seeing that cold air being pulled in, and so we are going to find areas in West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, some of those higher elevations, you know, we're looking at 1 to 2 feet of snow, very cold air coming in. Now, of course, we continue to watch as we monitor Sandy, and as we look through time, you can see here's just a little time clock there. Actually, I should circle it with that. But, you know, we're going to continue to watch this as it moves up the coast, but it will be taking that turn inland. But on the back side of this, we're going to be pulling in this cold air. You can see here we have a lot of these 40s coming through. So because of that, yes, we are talking about areas of snow. We have now rain, but as we go through time, you'll note that we're not only looking at rain, but look at what's developing here as we look to parts of, as I mentioned, you know, coming in here across Virginia. You can see a little bit West Virginia picking up some of that. We're finding some of that too into Kentucky, even into Tennessee and North Carolina. Now, these all, of course, are higher elevations, but yes, Vivian, I mean, with that snow, we're talking heavy, wet snowfall coming in, and we are talking about some of these places getting 1 to 2 feet.
Of course, just another thing we have to worry about when it comes to Hurricane Sandy. But we are here, of course, following all aspects of the storm. In fact, we have a full tropical update coming up next from our global forecast.
In light of these conditions, I'm going to sign an executive order mandating evacuation of Zone A areas.
And that would include 375,000 folks that live in this area of Zone A. That was Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York City.
And I think that was a very good call because we're expecting Sandy now. For the very latest on Sandy, let's go to hurricane specialist Carl Parker in the Global Forecast Center.
Yeah, every indication at this point is that the surge is going to be worse than what we saw with Hurricane Irene last year. And we'll take a look at some of those graphics in just a moment. First, the latest on the storm, and as of the 11 a.m. advisory, it's a 75-mile-per-hour storm. It's moving northeast at 14. It is much larger and more powerful than the category and the wind speed implies. Certainly, a Category 1 hurricane is no slouch, but this storm is an incredibly large, incredibly powerful system, and it's going to have a long-duration impact across the northeast. So here's the latest forecast track, along with the intensities from the Hurricane Center. They've narrowed it a bit, settling on a landfall here that involves the Jersey coast or perhaps the Delmarva, and then the storm coming into the northeast and really slowing down and slowly weakening at that point, then moving up and into the interior northeast. Now, here is a model forecast showing you the wind speeds, and you can see the winds gusting to hurricane force, we think, by tomorrow morning in Boston and also in New York, 30 to 50 there in D.C. Notice the wind direction, the vector, as we say. It's coming out of the north there, and so it would be a good time to think about what the lay of the land is around your house or wherever you live, around your apartment, where the big trees are and whether the trees are fully leaved. You notice as we go through this here towards the middle of the day, that's when we could see the hurricane force wind gusts getting into the D.C. area, Baltimore, and down into Norfolk, Virginia. And then late on Monday, it may finally begin to settle a bit, but still very, very windy, still gusting up to 50 miles per hour throughout that 95 corridor. And that continues even into Tuesday afternoon. This is why those high wind warnings have been issued for 36 hours in many of our major metros. Now, I also want to show you what's going on with the water being piled up here, and here is the surge threat, a very large part of the coast with a storm surge warning of 4 to 8 feet. That extends from Ocean City, Maryland, up through the Delaware Bay, all along the Jersey Shore, and along Long Island up to Montauk Point. You notice the 6 to 11-foot storm surge potential, Long Island Sound, all along the Connecticut shore there, and then also into Raritan Bay and up into New York City. And the problem here is that you've got water that's going to be pushing in. There's a confluence because of the nature of the coastline, so it's going to be pushing into Raritan Bay, getting up into New York Harbor, but also coming down and along Long Island Sound, and that's why officials are so concerned about storm surge flooding. Now, This is a look at the New York City hurricane evacuation zones. And if you want to see a more detailed version of this, you can go to nyc.gov or you can call 311 to get more information. But you've got a tremendous amount of detail here showing you exactly where Zone A is. So there has been an evacuation ordered for Zone A. If you live in these orange areas in Zone A, you need to evacuate. And all of these red dots indicate where the evacuation centers are. That's where you can go while you're evacuating. So it's time to take action now in New York City because this very serious water level rise is now being anticipated. Now, I want to show you what's going on right now relative to last year. So this is Irene. This is last year. The maximum water level rise, the most that we saw at any point during the event was 2 feet in Ocean City. 2 feet in Ocean City. The center of this storm is now more than 400 miles from Ocean City. Already, we have exceeded that mark. Already. So that gives you an idea of how serious this is, how much water is now piling up offshore and waiting to come in because of the size of this storm. And on top of that, you've also got this major area of wave heights here, tremendous wave heights, 30 feet, and it wouldn't be surprising to see wave heights of 10 to 20 feet coming into the Jersey Shore. So we've got multiple impacts here, and it's going to be probably devastating for some parts of the coastline. And then well inland, we're talking about a huge impact as far as power outages. Many, many people potentially in the dark with this storm. There's a look at the wind forecast to see the very large area of strong winds coming into the coast and again developing during the morning tomorrow and getting worse through the course of the day tomorrow. This is your last chance to prepare for the storm during the day today. Guys, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Carl. And really interesting, too, how he was talking about the water rise, and we've already exceeded in Ocean City what they got with Irene, and we've got so much ahead of us.
Oh, this could be a storm of historic magnitude, that is for sure. That is why we are constantly urging you to prepare right now and get out of... Right now, we are tracking Sandy. This potentially historic storm is battering parts of the East Coast, kicking up the surf, whipping up the winds, and dumping plenty of rain. We've got the very latest on this storm straight ahead.
And, you know, you really should be preparing now for the arrival of Sandy. The word from our experts here and the meteorologists, we all concur that this really is your last day to do this. By tomorrow, that storm, it is going to be on your front door, and it is going to be far too late to try to get some of these things done. And good morning and good afternoon to some of you in the East. Thank you so much for joining us here on the special version of Weekend Now, Tracking Sandy. I'm Heather Tesh.
And I'm Vivian Brown. Now, the Weather Channel is on around the clock, of course, to keep you ahead of this storm. That includes all of us here at the Weather Channel, the headquarters studios in Atlanta, and our team, of course, out in the field.
And, you know, they are fanned out throughout the East. Jim Cantori's in Battery Park City, that's in New York, and Reynolds Wolf is in Mystic, Connecticut. And, Vivian, I know you have some of the latest details, too.
Yes, of course, we will hear from you guys throughout the hour, of course. But first, let's get the very latest on the evacuation orders that are now in effect on Zone A in New York City. Now, that includes about 350,000 people. Officials will shut down the entire New York mass transit system at 7 o'clock tonight. In addition to that, New York City public schools are closed tomorrow.
That's right. And, you know, as far as that evacuation zone, too, we're talking almost 400,000 people affected.
Yeah.
And, you know, according to flight tracking company, FlightAware.com, more than 3,200 flights have been canceled ahead of Sandy. Amtrak also canceling some of their services today. And, you know, we're going to continue to find some delays for those flights that are ongoing. We've been seeing that reports of that this morning, too.
Well, let's show you the overall impacts now from Sandy, because we're talking about over 500 million people, well, 50 million people impacted, of course. Where you see the red zone here, or the red shaded area, that's where you need to take action right now, because 24 hours from now, now, things will look totally different, and you might actually be shut in by then because those winds will be increasing and the rains will be increasing as well. And the reason we're saying take action is because power could be out once those winds really start to blow the huge trees over power lines, and we could be without electricity for days.
That's true. And, you know, also there was a study done that on Hurricane Sandy, and there is an expectation of 10 million people, or customers, I should say, could be losing power, and you can see how widespread that area is.
Okay, so let's get some of the latest information on Sandy, where it is right now, and exactly how it will impact the Northeast from our hurricane specialist, Carl Parker, in our Global Forecast Center.
Well, guys, we've been referring to the storm as an historic storm, and that really is not hyperbole. I want to show you a graphic showing the winds that are just above the surface. This is Tuesday morning, and you can see where the very strong winds are. This is courtesy of Right Weather. Look at the size of the impact of this storm. So you're talking about getting out here to the lakes, to Wisconsin, down through the Ohio Valley, through the southeast, all of the Northeast enveloped by the influence of this storm. It really is going to be absolutely enormous when it comes in. A 75-mile-per-hour storm that really doesn't tell the story. Look at the pressure, 951. That is quite low. That is comparable to some of the greatest storms that we have seen in Northeast history. And there's a look at the area of strong winds, which comes in tomorrow morning. So things really going downhill tomorrow morning. Winds may begin to gust to near hurricane force or to hurricane force, and we expect that to really come in through the evening hours and the overnight hours across the 95 corridor, Boston getting down into New York and Philly, and into D.C. Tremendous wind. That goes right through Tuesday morning, so a long duration event. And even while all of this is occurring inland, you're going to see a tremendous push of water up into the coast there, and that's why we're so concerned about storm surge flooding and tremendous wave action. There's going to be coastal flooding. It will be a mess along the coastline, and it's not going to let up. And on top of all of that, winds, by the way, finally letting up here on Wednesday. On top of all of that, you've got a tremendous amount of rain potential. Could be several inches of rainfall in the Mid-Atlantic region, even double-digit rainfall totals in some isolated areas. All right, let's bring in Jim Cantore. He is reporting on the storm for us in the Battery in New York. And Jim, I know you were there for Irene, and this could be worse than what we saw during Irene, and in fact, it's starting to look that way.
That's what all the predictions are saying. You know, I love it when the atmosphere gives us a hint of what it's going to do, Carl. We saw that this morning already at Sandy Hook, where tides are running 2.5 feet above where they normally would be because of this astronomical high tide. We see, unfortunately, the flooding that's going on right now in South Florida because of this astronomical high tide. So that has to be factored into this situation. So many of the storm surge models now predicting a 6 to 11 foot rise, and that has allowed the mayor to now issue the evacuation order for Zone A, about 375,000 people to be affected in through here in some of the low-lying areas, including where we are here in Battery Park City. And, you know, for example, you know, if you're taking that surge into account in mean low water, you're going to have the water pretty much over this sidewalk up in through here. We had that with Irene, and it will be potentially even higher than that. And unfortunately, there are lower areas than where I'm just standing here. There are many, many areas here where there are hotels and even residential areas that will have to be evacuated. And again, a lot of that 375,000 is in this Zone A area. The park is planning on closing at about 11 o'clock this afternoon. There will be no schools, public schools in New York City tomorrow at all, and that's not surprising. I wouldn't be surprised if that was probably the case on Tuesday as well, but they'll decide that a little bit later on. And, you know, the seas are just going to be tremendous with, you know, 30-foot waves off the coast and seas possibly as high as 15 feet coming into the south shore of Long Island. And, you know, Carl, we talked about what's going on here with the storm coming ashore. The Great Lakes are going to have huge waves with the fetch over the Great Lakes, some as high as 20 feet in Chicago and even Cleveland as well. So, wow, this is just the biggest thing I've ever certainly covered in my entire career, and it's going to cover a lot of real estate before it's done. Ladies, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. And again, 863
New video just into our satellite center here at the Weather Channel. People boarding up homes and buying supplies in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. This is along the central Jersey shoreline where we've already started to feel some of the impacts. The winds will certainly be on the increase. We're talking about winds up to 50, 60, 70 miles an hour in the area within the next 24 hours. Here's a live look now at New York City, where we are awaiting, if you will, Sandy. We're certainly preparing for for. There has been a mandatory evacuation for Zone A that's right in the downtown Manhattan area. So you need to be rushing to completion right now everything that you need to possibly survive without electricity for, say, up to 7 days at least after this system comes on in. We're thinking tomorrow afternoon, that's when we'll really start to notice the conditions deteriorate. Now, right now, according to radar, we are getting some moisture. A lot of this not really reaching the ground in the New York City area, but you can see the winds are from the north and east, gusting at times up to 20 miles an hour, so the winds will just increase even more so from this point on. So deteriorating conditions for sure. As you can see, Sandy is over 400 miles away, the center of the storm anyway, and we're getting some very heavy rain and persistent winds a little farther down the coast from New York City, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, as well as near the Delmarva Peninsula. Of course, that's where Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia come together. But New York City alone, we're talking about, what, 18, 19 million people in the city, and winds will be gusting over 60 miles an hour tomorrow. Significant water rise, but check it out, tomorrow night, that's when the center of the storm gets closer, and those winds could increase to over 70 miles an hour, and this will continue right on through Tuesday. So it'll be a long duration event, and that's why we're so concerned. Heather?
All right, thank you so much. You know, I was just checking to at Nags Head, North Carolina. We are finding here that those wind gusts are at 44 miles per hour. So extremely blustery. Our Julie Martin joining us now from Nags Head with more.
Well, it is a raw day here along the Outer Banks. I am in Nags Head, where we're seeing tropical storm force winds. Those have been taking place all morning long since about midnight, so a long duration event. With that, some stinging rain coming in now from the north as the winds have shifted just a bit, and a very angry looking sea out there. The tide is out now. We're expecting another high tide around 6:30 this evening, but all morning that pier has just been taking a beating. So far, we have seen some coastal flooding as well. Some overwash along Highway 12 has made it completely impassable. So people in Cape Hatteras have no way out at this point other than a couple of pre-positioned barges, if they can even get out in the water. I want to show you some pretty dramatic video we have as well coming out of Cure, North Carolina. Now this is to my south, and you can see this was an eyewitness video of just some incredible waves coming ashore there. In fact, we have seen anywhere from, I'd say, 12 to 15-foot waves offshore. We've also gotten some buoy readings off of Hatteras that show 20-footers out at sea. Keep in mind, Sandy's still a great distance off. It is moving its way, its center coming this way, but not until about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's when it will then take a left and head right into the northeast. So this is really just a preview, a small preview of what is to come for millions of people in the northeast. Keep in mind, while we're dealing with wind gusts upwards of 50, 60 miles an hour, this storm is offshore. It's going to be coming onshore in the northeast. I'm meteorologist Julie Martin. Back to you guys.
And that is a great point to make, Julie. I mean, already she's being battered by the winds and the waves, and it's going to be even worse than that in the northeast.
That is right. In fact, we're going to check in now in Mystic, Connecticut with Reynolds Wolf. And Reynolds, you know, you're a very tall person, and you were saying earlier you were comparing your height and just some of the water rises that we could see.
Absolutely. That's one of the big things we're going to notice over the next 24 to, say, 36 hours. It's all going to begin with really the changing skies. Right now, you've got some cloudy skies out here. We expect them to become slate gray and then dark by tomorrow. Same time off the distance, you can see some of the fall colors, but that's going to change too. The big color we're going to have is, of course, the gray skies, the rain coming down, and that water really continuing to rise in through Long Island Sound back into this harbor, and that's where we can expect it to begin to pile up. Now, remember, just about a year or so ago, or actually when we had Irene through here, water was about as high as my ankles. Let me hop out here so you can see my ankles. But then this time we do anticipate it's going to be considerably higher, possibly up to 4 feet. We're going to talk more about that coming up. America, you're tuning into the Weather Channel. We're going to give you the very latest on Sandy coming up. Stay with us.
Just getting out of the way of the hurricane, getting out of harm's way.
We are sandbagging. We're going to board up tomorrow morning.
We brought in our furniture, our outdoor furniture. We're going to get tarps and sandbags and put them against the house.
We are bagging all kinds of different goodies.
We're not sure if it's going to happen or not, so better safe than sorry.
Doing what we need to do. Eyewitness pictures out of Connecticut. People in the town of Madison are taking Sandy seriously, and rightfully so. They're boarding up and moving out. They say they learned their lesson from Irene, as many of these homes were badly damaged during that storm.
And very important to take in all those loose objects outside that could fly around, lawn chairs, that type of thing. You know, Sandy is on the verge of slamming into the Northeast, and likely it is going to cause major damage. Our Professional Services Global Forecast Center in Andover, Massachusetts, specializes in aviation and energy.
Yeah, and right now we're joined by meteorologist Dan Leonard from the area. And Dan, what can we expect in terms of widespread power outages?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. It's actually pretty interesting. When we take a look at the overall scope of the system, it's almost unprecedented. We actually took a look at a couple of things yesterday, looked at the pressure of the storm on the coast and compared that to the pressure back across Canada. An unbelievable pressure difference between the two. And what that means for everybody is essentially we're not just looking at damage to the power structure along the coast, we're also looking at big problems inland, possibly as far west as, say, the Great Lakes states like Detroit and Cleveland could have some issues as well. And it's not just wind that we're looking at, it's also heavy rain that can cause a lot of issues with the power grid as well. I think you talked to Joe Merchant from NWS in Charleston earlier, and he was going for a lot of heavy wet snow down in West Virginia. So we got the whole gamut here, and there's going to be a lot of big problems on the power grid come Tuesday.
Yeah, because we've been focusing our attention on the deepening low pressure associated with Sandy, but that high pressure is adding to the overall mix of that huge pressure gradient. What do we expect in terms of the aviation industry? I mean, will planes be able to fly in winds like this?
Not really, especially tomorrow evening during the time of landfall. The major hubs, Newark, JFK, LaGuardia, are all going to be in deep trouble, probably closed down. Once winds get above 60 miles an hour, that's when the airports generally shut down. But we're not just looking at the strong winds in the big cities. Like you said, Vivian, that big pressure gradient all the way back into the Midwest, that's going to cause major problems, not just with the surface winds, but a lot of shear aloft. So we're looking at major turbulence. If you've got a flight in and out of, say, the Midwest cities down through the Southeast, probably going to have a lot of turbulence to deal with and some low-level shear. So keep that in mind as well. There will be ripple effects, not just in the big cities, but all across the country as the storm moves through.
All right, so the next 3 to 4 days, we might want to just hunker down and not try to fly into or out of the major hubs in the Northeast. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Right,
I would.
Okay. Thanks so very much.
Reschedule if you can.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's toss to Heather. She has more on this huge storm that we're watching. Of course, it's Sandy.
And, you know, Vivian, you two were just talking about, you know, the airline industry, but also, you know, keep in mind traveling. You just want to completely curtail that because we don't want you driving into flooded areas or an area where you can get into trouble. Trees could be coming down. This will be a very dangerous scenario. We can take a look now, and you can see what we are following here on our satellite view as we continue to monitor Sandy as it moves up the coast and then eventually, as we've been saying, takes that left-hand turn. As we look, we're going to see here too some of those winds and the intensity. Notice it's down below where you have some of those wind gusts, and these winds, while yes they're strong, Norfolk, you can see that wind gust to 43. We potentially by tomorrow morning are looking at areas like New York, potentially Boston, to be seeing some of these winds gusting up to 75. So it is going to be a very dangerous situation for a lot of us. Also, you know, we're very concerned too about the water rise. We are going to be, you know, watching here. You can see the times of the high tide, but also, of course, Vivian, it's a full moon. That's going to be affecting the tides, bringing them up as well. This really is the perfect storm, Vivian, in the sense of being imperfect for all of us.
In fact, the perfect storm that we know was out over sea, so this one could be even more prolific, if you will, than the perfect storm because, as we've been telling you, it is expected to move inland. Okay, here it is tomorrow, still offshore, but a little closer to the northeast coast. So the rain, the wind will be a huge factor. Here's a look at the overall temperatures. It'll be cooling down, of course, back over the Great Lakes and even cold enough for some significant snow in the mountains here of West Virginia and the Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania, even down to the mountains of North Carolina. Additional snow will be falling on top of the beautiful leaves, of course, that have peaked in the Boone area and over the Appalachians in western North Carolina. And here's a look at Tuesday, again following Sandy very, very closely. By then, keep it tuned.